Alright, so I'm back at this Souls project again. I took a break when I was working on a game jam that used my old Souls template as a base to try it out in a real-world situation. I found it wasn't great. It wasn't very performant. It was very dependent on itself in a lot of ways, and so when I wanted to add and remove features, it ended up crashing. So I rebuilt it from the ground up for Godot 4.2 with the new renewed animation mixer instead, and I changed how I do pretty much everything, where everything for the most part now reacts with signals, so hardly anything is dependent on itself, signals and conditions. But you have a lot of the same features. You have attacks, attack combos if you keep tapping the button, power attacks, guarding, gadget left hand attack as well, the ability to change gear, so attacking with the left gadget, changing my right hand weapon, which changes to a different animation set, both for walking, running, strafing, power hits, whatever you may use. I redid the control situation as well. So the control situation, it's always controlled oriented to whatever's the current camera, which means you can change cameras. If you go into an area with a more cinematic camera, the orientation will update to whatever the active camera is. So up is away, down is toward the camera, left is right, etc. Or sorry, left is left, right is right, which is kind of like Devil May Cry, Metal Gear, Resident Evil, a lot of those ones where when in some cases it's a follow camera or top down, but then if you go into certain cinematic areas, it's oriented toward a given area. We've added a targeting system, so you can target enemies and now it'll shift to strafing around them instead. Moving left and right on the look stick or on the mouse will change what the active target is. That works as well, in the follow camera, it's all exactly the same. I've added a basic AI so you can kind of see how navigation works and changing states. So he'll chase me if he's far away. If he gets close enough, he'll walk and start trying to attack me. I've got basic blocking. There's also perfect parries. I can attack me. If I can attack faster. Sound effects and things added through signals. Still working out the details of it. Obviously there's a roll with invulnerability frames, or a dodge back if you're not running. If you hold that dodge button, he'll go into a sprint, a bit more speed. Added sensors, of course, for, as you saw before, for a ladder, sensing where the ladder is and where the ladder is not to know when to hop on and off. Getting in front of doors to open doors, getting in front of gates to open gates. And I can give the basic information of how all of this works. I'll go quick because I don't want this to be a long video. But basically, I've separated out the functions of everything so they communicate with signals instead, and they're not dependent on each other. So I can delete any one of these different aspects and they won't affect anything. And then everyone's trying to focus on their own role in the cohesive build that is the character. That way you can troubleshoot stuff specifically in one spot if you can, depending on the issue. So the player basically manages states, and I don't use a state machine with nodes because so much of what's happening here is just shifting between different movement states, movement types, which and receiving input. Obviously, I do all the input through here as well. So if interact is pressed, if jump is pressed, if the attack button's pressed, all it does is trigger really basic commands: dodge, attack, jump, depending on whatever input you've given it. The physics process is quite simple as well. Rotate the player or free move the player, rotate the player, free move the player, dash movement or ladder movement. So these states are quite basic. They're just controlling movement for the most part. And so I didn't feel the need to do a massive state machine because that would actually convolute and make it even harder to pass, I think, the signals around that I wanted to do. So basic movement states are applied here. The actual methods for things like attack, dodge, etc. should be changed. The way I've got them going, if you take a look, they look more complex than they are, like this attack code. Attack, if you look at it really, it goes into an attack state, waits a little bit, emits a signal, waits a bit, emits a signal, moves the character, because movement code happens here, and this is not a root motion controller, this is a in-place controller, so it moves the player forward during that attack, waits a bit, emits a signal again. So most of this really is attack, dash, and then end the attack, go back to free state. So it's mostly just state changing and emitting some signals at a certain time. This is not best practice. I don't like doing these await statements. This is not great. It'd be much, much better to plug this into the actual animation itself. You should plug into the animation at the specific moment the swing starts, attack started. When the attack ends, or when the swing actually is happening, swing, emit, and the attack is finished, end. Those signals are much better in the animation player than here, generally, for a production game. But for prototyping, this is really handy. It means you can swap in any animation you want in the animation tree, and this is going to more or less try to estimate, all right, I'm halfway through the attack, I'm probably swinging now. It's not going to be perfect to match the swing and the cooldown, etc., but it'll work out of the box with any animation you feed it. But I would recommend cleaning this, putting all these signals in the actual animations themselves. It's just a lot of work that would be broken if you brought in your own animations. So I've coded it, but it'd be better to do that in the animation player. But that's how almost everything is here. The attacks, the dodges, the hurts, etc. It's mostly just change a state, wait a minute, emit some signals, and then go back. All those signals talk to these other different nodes. So like if you were to change weapons, like let's just say weapon change, you'll see what happens here. Changes to a dynamic action state. That basically means I can still walk around while doing this animation. My legs are going to be still animated. Emit the weapon change thing. Wait a second. Emit that the weapon finished changing. Wait a second. Emit that the weapon change process has ended and go back to free state. So you see it's just signal changes. But then things like this weapon system, they're sitting around. They connect up immediately to those signals, and they're listening happily to do things like, oh, you have a weapon in your right hand. When you push that weapon change, I'm going to move it to my back, to my back, and I'll move the back weapon to my hand, and I will do a little bit of communicating to those weapons, like, hey, you're equipped now, and hey, you're unequipped. This allows you to do things like the torch, like, hey, you're equipped. The torch goes, oh, I'm equipped, and it can turn on the fire. That way, these signals can communicate what needs to happen rather than have to call directly to each object. This is great. That means I can do things like put the sword on my back, put the torch in my hand, and the torch will know that when I'm equipped, turn on. When I'm not equipped, turn off. Because weapons and swords, etc., I just have them all as equipment pieces. They can be interchanged. I could put the sword in my hand and the shield in my hand and the sword on my back. It doesn't matter. Or I have left hand. It doesn't matter. It'll all be fine. As you can see, like the weapons itself is basically just a area 3D waiting to detect if a body enters it, and then it tells the right hand, hey, I hit something. The weapon itself just cares to know that it's equipped, and if it's equipped, it'll emit that it's equipped. So you could add things, like I said, like fire or smoke or whatever, or if you had special animations or whatever, you could trigger them, all using just that, hey, I'm equipped setting. On the actual animation state tree, the meat and potatoes, this is where all the complex stuff actually happens. And if I say complex, it's actually not that bad. Almost everything happens in this movement state machine at the beginning, where these transitions detect through the advance conditions, like, is my player node currently in the state of sprint? If so, let's move you to the sprint tree. And the sprint tree is this whole other separate tree of, can I, how is my movement happening? What's my sprint look like if I'm falling? Slash tree, if my weapon currently is a slash weapon. If I'm currently in the free state, this is my default state. But if I change to a weapon that is heavy, then it will move to the heavy tree. The heavy tree has its own animation states for moving, strafing, etc., how falling looks, jumping looks, etc. when I have those weapons, heavy weapon in my hand. If I go into attack state while carrying a heavy weapon, it'll go to the heavy attack 2, etc. So it's all just detecting the conditions of the character. Whatever state he's in, it's reacting and putting the character in the proper place. It's not necessarily having to call out directly, hey, run this, run that, run the other. There's a little bit of that for things outside of the movement states, things like the weapon change, the block, the guarding, parrying, dodging, jumping, these one-shot actions that doesn't matter what weapon type you're holding or whether you're strafing or dodging or whatever. If I'm strafing and I get hit, this should override any state that's going on and simply play that I'm hurt animation. And so these one-shots are in a chain. It doesn't matter the order. Just put them in here, however, to interrupt whatever animation is happening in the state machine. And these things are triggered. If you look at the animation state machines script, these things are also quite basic here. They just are looking at the player node's various different signals that he emits when he jumps, when he climbs a ladder, hops off a ladder, whatever, and then runs the associated code. So if I see a door, he sees the door started signal come from the player. If I go to door started, all it's simply doing is saying, hey, one shot request, open the door. The run shot request is a helper function I add here. Request one shot. And all that does is, hey, requests the string that you plug in here. So it's really quite basic. I probably don't even need that, but I like cleaning up my one shots to make it easier to type. So the animation state machine, yeah, is just listening for signals from the player's different state changes and signals, and then triggers the animation that's needed. So it manages all things animation-wise. Sound effects work in a very similar way. They're just simply listening for the player to start the dodge or start the jump or start the whatever, and when it does, it triggers that sound effect. You could, again, add these directly into the animation player, and it would look and sound probably a lot better because it's going to line up perfectly with your animations. This is me just doing the best I can with code so that you can immediately plug in whatever animations you like, and it's going to try to work. It's going to try to do the best it can to prototype quickly for you. Some of these things don't matter too much. A footstep system, miniature sensors on the feet that recognize every footstep. Every time the foot hits the floor, it'll send a signal which tells it to, tells the foot to play a sound. The interact sensor. We can talk about the interact sensor real quick. So for anything that's like a door, a treasure chest, a ladder, anything like that, those are all the same type of object. They're just an interact object, and they all have the same command. If we go to like a door object, they all have a activate function, whether it's a door or a gate. I give them all the same activate animation, and they're all in the group Interactable. What my interact sensor is simply two area 3Ds, one at head level, one at foot level. And if they see an object, if an object enters one of these area 3Ds that isn't interactable, it'll emit a signal saying, hey, I see something at my top sensor, or hey, I see something at my bottom sensor, or hey, I see something at both. And then if the player hits the interact button, here we go, I'll show you. If the, that's the wrong spot. If the player hits the interact button, all it simply does is say, hey, that interact that the sensor saw, run your activate code, whatever it is. I don't care if you're a chest or a gate or a door or whatever, run your interact code. That way I don't have to pack a whole bunch of code here into the player depending on what it sees. The player just sees something interactable. It's like humans, we see something, I want to interact with it, interact with the thing. I leave it on the thing itself to figure out what needs to happen. So things like the door, for example. The door would be like, oh, this requester, this player is asking me, sees me, a sensor location, which sensor saw me. Hey, a player saw me. What should I do? Well, if I'm locked, I'm just going to run the animation to shake the door. If I'm not locked, let me sense the distance I am to the player, and then I'm actually going to call to the player, hey, player, start your door logic. Here's the information of where you are in relation to me, etc. And here's how long move time. Here's here's a little delay knowing that you're gonna have to move into place. Because when this game is running, that player's gonna see an object. You see if you watch the output here. Where's my other controller? Sorry, my controller is sitting on my lap and it's activating the attack button. All right, if I see an object, you can see in the output, door object is seen. Door object is seen by the bottom sensor. The gate sensor is seen at both, just depending on where the detection areas are. But hey, I see a door. If I push the interact button, the door is going to see me, see where I am, tell me where to move to line up center, and then we're both going to trigger our animations at the same time. Boom, for me to open the door and for him to open. Same thing with the gate. I see the gate. If I push the activate button, the door is going to kind of handshake with my player. Here's where I am in relation to you. Here's how you can get centered up with me. Here's the transform that you should take. And then we can both trigger our animations at the same time. Make sense? Same thing with the ladder. Hey, both my sensors see this ladder. If I push the interact button, if both my sensors are seeing it, I must be at the bottom of the ladder. If only my bottom sensor sees a ladder, it must mean that I'm at the top of the ladder to get up on top. Same thing with I'm at the top. Hey, only my bottom sensor sees the ladder. Push the interact button. I must be at the top. It must be time to play the get on the bottom side of this ladder animation. Some of this stuff is kind of a pain that you wouldn't normally have to deal with if it were, non-root, if it were root motion, but this is me working around the root motion aspects. Anyway, so that's it for now. I'm going to get off this thing, but hopefully you guys can see, since everything's running with signals and input, triggering those signals, it's very performant. It's not checking things every second to decide what to do. It's not all running in the process section, waiting for input. It's just trigger-based, everything reacting to everything else, and I can delete entire sections of this stuff, and none of it's going to break. I could delete the entire weapon system, and my character would be perfectly content. There'd be no issues. He would have no, and here, I'll just do the, well, no, I won't even bother going through it. I need to get this video ended. But you get the idea.